we're all very familiar as consumers of how frustrating it is to go to the store, whether it's a grocery store or some other place, and the one product that you want isn't there, or that maybe the price doesn't match what you were expecting, or maybe you place an online order and 50% of it got substituted or not found. That's a very common problem that we all have every day. And it's the reason that 85% of shoppers switch brands, because they get frustrated by that experience. Well, if you zoom out larger and kind of look at retail as a whole industry, it's moving towards this era of what people were referring to as intelligent retail. But about 94% of CEOs say that they need new operating models to stay competitive because of all the stuff that's hitting their industry. There's inflation, there's labor shortages, there's AI-driven competition, et cetera, et cetera. And it's reshaping the industry, but the place where they need the insight, which is inside the store at the shelf, where shoppers are making decisions every day of whether they're going to buy stuff and whether they're going to come back tomorrow and buy stuff, that is a data desert for them.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. I also run an agency, a nutraceutical brand, and a nonprofit. Super excited to have Caitlin Allen on, who's the SVP of Marketing at Simbe. And if you look at her background, you can actually see what it is that Simbe makes, which are these robots that not only take inventory, but capture a whole bunch of data. So what's the elevator pitch these days for Simbe, for your teams when you're out there talking to retailers and other organizations that might need robotic assistance?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kevin, and thank you for having me. In lieu of very quick background, so folks can anchor my comments of whether they're relevant for them or not, I started in nonprofits, but have been in B2B marketing my whole career since, so almost 2 decades. And I grew up on the thought leadership and content marketing side of things, and then got into leading early and growth stage marketing teams the last 10 years. So to your question, Simbe's robots and then the fixed sensors that we sell, what's our current elevator pitch? I think we're all very familiar as consumers of how frustrating it is to go to the store, whether it's a grocery store or some other place, and the one product that you want isn't there, or that maybe the price doesn't match what you were expecting, or maybe you place an online order and 50% of it got substituted or not found. That's a very common problem that we all have every day. And it's the reason that 85% of shoppers switch brands, because they get frustrated by that experience. Well, if you zoom out larger and kind of look at retail as a whole industry, it's moving towards this era of what people were referring to as intelligent retail. But about 94% of CEOs say that they need new operating models to stay competitive because of all the stuff that's hitting their industry. There's inflation, there's labor shortages, there's AI-driven competition, et cetera, et cetera. And it's reshaping the industry, but the place where they need the insight, which is inside the store at the shelf, where shoppers are making decisions every day of whether they're going to buy stuff and whether they're going to come back tomorrow and buy stuff, that is a data desert for them. And that data desert is the reason why retail has 100% annual attrition, because retail workers are leaving with the top reason cited being manual tasks that are repetitive, which is basically another way of saying they hate manual audits. And then, there's other things that we find in our database, like over about 2/3 of the items that stores believe are out of stock are actually in their stores. They're just not in a place that are known. And so basically what we're helping them do is to digitize the shelf with devices or hardware devices like Tally the robot, and other modalities, so that stores can have flawless execution and optimized inventory, and then also do a better job of empowering their teams and giving their shoppers incredible experiences. And if you look at it a more like industry ecosystem kind of level, that data and those insights are actually becoming the operating layer of how the ecosystem is collaborating, because retailers have a very nuanced network of relationships with other CPG suppliers, manufacturers, wholesalers, distributors, retail media providers, et cetera. And so it's this incredible moment where the industry is reinventing itself, and we get to be a big part of that.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up on that. You mentioned, online orders, right? And it's like a different disappointment if I'm walking through a grocery store and I don't find the thing I'm hoping on the shelf. But obviously, having inventory levels be accurate are particularly important if somebody's coming in on off of an Instacart or something like that. Do you think that's been a big driver of adoption at the retail level? Because now, it's not just eyeballing the shelf to know what the inventory level is, but it's you have to transmit that information out via API to third parties so that they can be confident that if they send a shopper in, other than the actual end user customer, right, that they'll be able to, fulfill that order.
Oh, totally. I mean, there's a ricochet here, right? So 50% of items ordered online via Instacart are substituted or not found. So that's a
Wow,
problem
that's
for the
high.
shopper. But, then think about business models to your point, like Instacart and DoorDash and others. Do they want to actually send labor to the store? There are huge issues there. What's interesting though, once you start to know the exact item location, or the exact location of your items, is not only can you trust your online inventory accuracy, so that e-commerce becomes a channel that's something that consumers trust, but you also can use things like wayfinding in the store, where, like, let's say you go to your local Dick's Sporting Goods and there's like 4 different items that you want to buy. If they had an app and you input those items, it could tell you exactly where to go in what order so that your trip is the shortest. The
Right.
same can be true for like a store team at a grocery store that needs to fulfill an order with, maybe 2 dozen items, and it gives them a prioritized pick path through the store as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different use cases where it's, I anchored us to the in-store experience, but to your point, there's an omni-channel data usage, or data play, because the shelf is kind of the linchpin of the supply chain, but it informs all sorts of things over the supply chain.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, people have most likely seen your mobile robots in the retail grocery store environment, but I'm sure there are some less obvious target markets that you guys go after, or any of the other ones, sort of particularly interesting use cases where you've been able to deploy
Yeah.
the technology.
So we did start in regional grocery, and we've gone up market to tier one. We haven't announced those retailers yet, but they're coming soon. And we also have customers in liquor and home improvement and farm supply, club wholesale, and hardware. But the ones that might be less obvious to your point or your question are other applications with AI and analytics firms, right? So you can integrate real-time data into predictive models that start to enhance accuracy and decision making. And this is the next evolution, right? Beyond just our platform signaling next best action.
Hmm.
So that's one. The other would be labor providers. There are like staffing agencies that send folks into work at retail brands, retail stores, and so knowing exactly what level of staffing is needed, or even being able to make staff more efficient and
Right.
focus on tasks that they enjoy more. There's applications there that promote things like retail worker productivity and retention. And then there's other plays for wholesale and distribution, which are probably pretty self-explanatory, but the one that I'd like to explain before I kind of close out in this answer is CPG. So right now, if I own a category or a product, and responsible for marketing and merchandising that product, the information that I get about what's on the shelf in the stores that my product, let's say Coke, um, actually, let's say Oreos. So I don't actually hear how well my Oreos are doing in terms of being sold or being promoted with their kind of promotion of the day until about a month later, because of how the industry operates in sending that information to CPG brands. And so the way that CPG brands have gotten around that is they have paid gig workers to go into stores basically every day to go take pictures of the shelf to see if something's being priced and promoted correctly and if it's actually needing to be restocked. So if you can start to view that information virtually, like we have a couple tools where you can literally see your shelf and see your store, like walk around kind of like a Google Street View. You
Yeah.
don't need to pay for that anymore. And all of a sudden you're able to make data-driven merchandising decisions in a way you never have before about why product's moving and why it's not.
Yeah, it's interesting when I think about the sort of more close to just-in-time inventory levels that your technology provides. It also seems like maybe you guys would understand theft slash shrinkage, whatever you want to call it, earlier than just using the checkout data, right? Because the checkout data, as you subtract from inventory based on what goes through the barcode scanner on the exit, you don't really know how much that correlates to what's on the shelf. And in certain neighborhoods, like they've started to lock things down.
Yeah,
I think it was Tide or something like that became like a currency, and people were like stealing it because you could use it on the street to trade for things, and sort of the landscape has changed in retail pretty dramatically, and this idea of being able to get an earlier read on theft or shrinkage maybe as a result of a bot noticing it is really
totally.
interesting.
Yeah, so shrink is a really interesting issue because, to your implicit point, Kevin, usually about a quarter of shrink is due to shopper action, and then this other 75% might happen because product arrives in the back warehouse and doesn't get scanned in the right way, or maybe it's not put in the right place, and so it's not actually out of stock or stolen, but someone thinks it is. There's also components of like store associates sometimes may be involved as well, and so having that real-time visibility is quite important. We have little devices called Tally Spot. It's like a camera that goes on the shelf, and the fixed sensor is often put in places that have high traffic or high turnover or high value items. So think about like rotisserie chickens, like at 4 p.m. in the afternoon when everyone's realizing what they need to eat for dinner, and they're realizing they don't have dinner at home. Or maybe it's like the place where your jewelry is kept in your store, or more expensive apparel, or even for grocers, often that bottom of basket area at checkout. Like, a lot of times, um, people will walk out of a store with maybe like a carton of eggs that's really big, or water bottles on the bottom of their grocery carts, and they probably haven't even intended to steal. It's out of sight, out of mind. So having that real-time visibility into exactly what's happening and knowing exactly where your items are, it helps have a kind of immediate next best action response.
Yeah, that's great. I've always been sort of fascinated by, store planograms, right? And folks who don't know the grocery industry might probably not, you don't even know what a planogram is. But this idea that some people thought a lot about where things go and the flow of people through stores, and it's not a coincidence that the dairy and eggs is diagonally opposite from the entrance, right? That you have to go the furthest to get there. And of course, in the case of IKEA or, Stu Leonard's in the New York area, right? They've actually turned their entire stores into mazes in order to get people through all of those areas. But when it's a free-flowing grocery store, I sort of, this idea of being able to see down to the brand level of what insights are happening. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely the concept of planograms versus reality. And, retailers spend a lot of very important time putting together kind of the perfect plan back in the office, so to speak. But what actually happens, what your realogram is, so to speak, instead of your planogram, that's what drives the shopper experience. And, I believe I saw a study recently that said that 6 of 10 retailers and D2C manufacturers have below 80% inventory accuracy, which is it just leads to a lot of inaccuracies on the shelf. And that prevents you from having product in the right place so that you can actually sell it. It prevents you from understanding like demand shifts, so you don't have as good of inventory planning or demand forecasting. And it also really impacts things like retailers' relationships with CPG brands or other vendor partners, because they can't adequately understand out of stock patterns, which kind of gets back to that topic we were speaking about a few moments ago related to data driven merchandising. So what our platform instead of products kind of enables is this ability to be data driven and to understand when product moves, why product moves, and to also start to make predictions and suggestions of where you can think about coupling products or promotions that you might be able to consider that that might be a better fit. So think about maybe putting the Oreos near your milk is a good idea, or having I can't think of an example that's going to be kind of surprising, but the obvious ones that come to mind would be like pasta and pasta sauce or the peanut butter and jelly, just making recommendations that might not immediately come to mind when you're thinking about your planogram, but because you have understanding of your realogram, you can actually respond to real consumer demand.
Right, right. Great point. Given the fact that your robots and systems know so much about the inventory and what's actually available, including potentially in the back room, do you foresee a time when the consumer, the shopper, is actually interacting with the robot to ask the same question that I might ask in this from a store associate, like, "Oh, it seems like you're out of the 6 ounce applesauce. Do you have any more of these in the back?"
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question. And my answer, which I'll explain, is no and yes. So the no piece of the answer is technology that is laser focused on doing its core, serving its core role or offering its core value is best in class. That's what kind of keeps a best in class hardware unit staying the market leader. So that's another way of saying Tally is super focused on doing what it does best, which
Right,
doesn't currently involve communicating with shoppers. The yes part of my answer is it gets back to kind of the data and the analytics piece. So we have customers like Schnucks, America's most innovative grocer of 2023. They use our platform's item location detection capabilities, and they connect that data with their electronic shelf labels. And so let's say that you want yogurt and the yogurt is out, but there's yogurt in the back. The electronic shelf label at Schnucks says, ask an associate to go get me. I'm in the back of the house. So
right.
it's, it is very possible to use the information that we collect in that way. And I think, the other shopper facing or store team facing tools that we talked about already were related to kind of the wayfinding in stores. Let's say you want to buy 3 dozen items at your grocery store and you have 10 minutes, like it can help you accomplish both goals in that same amount of time if the data is integrated with a retailer's shopping app. And I think that the future of where we're headed, which I've already kind of seeded, but is this idea of predictive inventory management, predictive on-shelf availability, where maybe reordering will be automated. Maybe demand forecasting will become automatic, where it's based on these inputs, and so maybe shoppers will be at a place where they don't necessarily need to ask those questions in the future because the product will always be on the shelf.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point because obviously the stores all want consumer app adoption, right?
Yeah.
So if the app gives you better information about where things are, including in the back, if you don't see it on the shelf, right? That's a huge win for everybody,
Yeah.
including the store. So let's put on your B2B marketer hat now, right? B2B marketing has pretty volatile sales cycles in general. And sometimes you're lucky and get the one meeting close where the people are so prepared, having done all the research about your company, that your sales team shows up and it's basically like a rubber stamp, right? And then other times it's a committee that gets formed, right? And it takes forever, right? Because they're evaluating as a committee. So, how should B2B marketers try to pre-identify for their own efficiency those one call closes, the speedy closes, and potentially also LTVs of those speedy closes?
So I wish I had the magic recipe for this. And I think it depends a lot on the go-to-market model. So ours, just kind of setting the stage a little bit, is we're selling to executives and we're selling really, really large price tags and very long sales cycles. And though that generally is 12 to 36 month sales cycles, we're generally talking to buying committees of like dozens. And the price tags, it's usually like 6 figures for a pilot, but then we're talking more like 8 figures over the lifetime of the eventual contract size that gets signed. So I'm dealing with a very complex sale at Simbe, which is all kinds of fascinating and frustrating and inspirational for great creativity. So I would say first and foremost is deep qualification up front. So that involves aligning with sales on the criteria that our ICPs have, and then using technology to measure things like intent, to prioritize accounts so that they get surfaced to sales as hot or not. So that's one thing. What's worked really well for us is, well, so far, is what I call FOMO tactics. So we have 2 or 3 lightning strikes per year that the markets kind of come to expect, where we launch a report or we're at an event, we make a big announcement, that kind of thing. And what works for us is when we spotlight customers who are winning and then dive deeply into what they're doing to win. And what the FOMO that gets created is it creates this urgency around, like, this is a trend that's coming fast. I might be behind the curve.
Mm.
But the thing about FOMO that we often forget as marketers is you also have to think about something I call FOMO, which is fear of messing up. Like, any executive that's going to go out on a limb and do something innovative, their natural fear is going to be, is this the right thing? Should I just buy Microsoft instead? And so when we spotlight customers, we spend a lot of time talking about the exact blueprint of things they do to succeed so that others can basically follow in their footsteps, so that we address their FOMO, so to speak.
Right.
So those are the first 2. The third is kind of self-explanatory and fairly obvious, but compelling proof points and really leading with insights that generate ahas that challenge current thinking, like the fact that robots are 25 times more effective than humans at auditing items, or that 90% of pricing errors go unseen. Things like that, leading with insights that eventually lead to questions about your value prop is important. And then in my business model in particular, we do a lot of, the fourth thing is leveraging champions. We do a lot of working with our strategic advisors and our strategic partners and our investors. I send them all our top 3 to 5 accounts that we want to get to land that month, every month. And they do a quick search of their LinkedIn profiles to see who they might be able to introduce us to. And then if they have relationships, then we custom write their outreach. We provide them with briefing documents. We set them up for, those intro calls, et cetera, et cetera. And we actually just closed a big retailer in the UK this week that had initially had opted to maybe go a different direction and ended up going with us because of a board level relationship that we had, where that board member had a really good conversation with the CEO and opened the door for our sales team to talk with them more, and they ended up going in our direction. So that's been really fun. And I think too, the modular adoption model that I talked about, our land and expand motion, is the last one that I would highlight. I've seen with that offering phased implementation options like a pilot program is a good way of allowing prospects to see value without making that full commitment. I think the thing that's important not to lose sight of, though, in that phase is they have to have skin in the game, and there has to be a lot of work done on the front end to understand strategy, what value creation is going to look like, and then have commitment on both sides to really see those KPIs being delivered all the way through. Otherwise, you're just basically giving something to someone for free.
Right. Well, that's a great point. I'm a huge fan of land and expand when I wear my did it agency hat, because whatever the hottest pain point is a lot easier to close,
Yeah.
and almost never go under agency of record, because that's a scary decision for somebody to make. So let's for those B2B marketers who have more than one ICP, right? Because you may, I guess, maybe within your categories, you've probably got slight nuances with regards to hardware stores versus grocery, et cetera. But for B2B marketers in general, when there's more than one ICP and they're thinking about internal resource allocation from a marketing perspective, I guess you're supporting sales, so those should be pretty closely aligned. How should they break that down in deciding, okay, I have X budget of human capital and dollar capital. How do I allocate those resources across my ICPs?
Yeah, this is hard, and I feel this pain because we sell into store ops and IT and finance and supply chain, except, I could keep going. In my opinion, less is more here. I spend 80% of my budget on less than 20% of our ICPs, where we feel like we have the greatest resonance and potential for that particular time period. Last year we closed more net new business in 2024 than the entire history of the company combined. So I think that's a pretty good proof point that at least some of it worked. And then, that prioritization, like it's made basically in line with the highest lifetime value segments and the fastest sales cycles. And then we're obsessed with persona-based messaging as well as channel strategy alignment to those personas and those messages, and having a pilot and scale approach in how we bring campaigns and messaging to life. Like whenever we are still in a motion because we're still kind of in that growth stage as a business where we're still launching to new verticals. And so every time we have our vertical playbook gets deployed in a new retail sector, we have kind of a slow crawl and then walk where different things are tested before we roll out to the full segment. And that's not rocket science. It's just, I find it hard sometimes to remember that I don't have to have all the answers right off the bat.
That's a great advice. When you're out there buying media as a B2B marketer, we found across a bunch of Did It clients that, for example, that with the right custom audiences that Meta outperforms LinkedIn on an ROI basis. But yet a lot of B2B marketers just automatically assume like, oh, it's Meta. Like that's not where I advertise, right? Are there any other things have you seen similar things or also some non-obvious media types? Obviously, search is demand harvesting, so the right keywords work great there. But when you're sort of trying to go a little bit up the funnel and you're buying media, have you found some unexpected wins in certain platforms?
Yeah, I got, when I saw this question, I pinged someone on my team. I was like, oh, we need to probably test Meta. uh, we haven't invested much in paid media yet, Kevin, just because our focus, I'm about 16, 17 months into my role. I was the first marketer they'd hired. We now have a team of 5, including me, and then some agency and consultant support. But we didn't have really any data to build a strategy on it first. So we
Right.
focused on the channels that had been high impact for sales. And we knew when I started the role that what had worked were events and PR announcements. And so we really leaned in and spent big on both of those activities. And last year, events and PR combined drove 95% of our net new pipeline. And that was within the context of closing more net new logos in 2024 than in the history of the company before. So that's where we've been to date. I did just hire someone with some digital marketing capabilities. And so we will be testing more digital demand generation tactics, and I'm excited to see what they involve. And now, thanks to you, they'll probably involve Meta. Um, so I'm gonna kind of take a pass on that question.
Sure, no problem. I mean, we've seen that to some extent, for a sales-driven organization, that having a little bit of that media there is sort of air cover, right? So
Mhm.
that since you know exactly what your ICP looks like, one could make the argument like, I don't need any media at all. Like I know who I'm pitching. I have everything about them. I know when they were born. I know they like golfing. Like I know everything. And
Yeah.
therefore, you don't need to buy any media. But we find that for B2B marketers, having some air cover and people sort of saying, "Oh yeah, I totally saw something. I saw that logo. I saw that ad," can be useful sometimes.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, for instance, we're selling to executives that are, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, however old they are, but like that's a generation that's probably not on TikTok. And
Right.
in retail, like not everyone is actually on LinkedIn. So it depends on, I think, the age bracket or the demographic, it might be the better way to say that, of who you're selling to, but it's definitely interesting. My mom, for instance, falls kind of into the age bracket of folks that we sell to, and she's on Facebook all the time.
One other thing that is sort of, I think, probably not unique to your business. In B2B, it happens a lot where the sort of lines between sales and marketing are blurry,
Yeah.
right? Because again, you have such a tightly defined ICP that the marketing team knows who they're going after, the sales team knows who they're going after. Sales teams would obviously love to get Glengarry leads from marketing, right? So from that perspective, interests are aligned. But when you're sort of doing the lead generation and deciding sort of, and maybe there isn't also a CRO role in your organization, but how do you find the best way to coordinate that, right? To get the
Yeah.
right message to the right audience at the right time through sales channels, but also through marketing channels.
We do have we call him a chief commercial officer, but we do have one. I don't worry too much about roles and responsibilities. I worry about getting to the end of the road together. How are we going to win? How are we going to meet and exceed plan? And so I think within that framework, being really aligned on messaging, metrics, and then measuring your plays. I guess messaging, metrics, and your segments, and then measuring your plays against those to really improve all three
Right.
is at a high level how I think about it. You could say in our organization, I think, I own demand generation and brand, and the chief commercial officer owns, maybe you could say pipeline and revenue. That being said, like, for instance, events drove 70% of our pipeline last year. Marketing's not like marketing may organize the events, but the salespeople are at the events. They're the ones, like, we're doing coordinated outreach before and after. We have air cover and ground cover. So it's hard in my mind to say who owns pipeline. I think we share pipeline, and I don't care if all of our pipeline comes from marketing or none of it, as long as the company gets to its number. And so having, the trust and the regular feedback loops, that's the kind of supports that are super crucial. And my chief commercial officer is pretty new, but I'm a big fan, so I'm feeling pretty lucky.
That's great. What else should B2B marketers be thinking about in 2025 as they sort of make their way through their ever-changing landscape?
Yeah. I'm not going to say AI because I think that's obviously that's an obvious one. Um, the three that are things that are coming to mind are partnered audience building. We're investing really heavily, and this is part of the reason why we haven't spent much in paid media, on partnerships with very big and frankly very expensive industry influencers, but it's really moving the dial for us. So that's something I'm watching, that could be useful for others. The convergence of brand and demand gen. Sixth Sense this morning shared new research that, it used to be that 70% of inbound demo requests came from people that had already made up their mind about people they wanted to work with or which vendor they wanted to work with. It's now like up at 83%, I think was the statistic. So, brand is a demand generation function in my mind, and there needs to be very clear handoffs between like a thought leadership narrative to a value prop to a product or solution capability. And then the third thing I would say is customer-led growth. We've been in somewhat of a turbulent is too extreme of a word, but a vacillating economic climate. And so Pareto principling your focus area where you're getting money already, particularly when you have multiple products or offerings to sell, is a really great place to focus. You already have relationships there. You're already providing value. And so focusing on how you empower your customers to be growth engines for you, whether it's through referrals or through expansion, et cetera, maybe even part of your top of funnel activities is something that I think we'll continue to see in the future as well.
Yeah, those are great points. I think, interestingly, on the sort of partner alliances and partner marketing, where you're
Yeah.
co-creating content or sometimes sharing booth space or at events together and sort of sending folks to each other's booths when you're non-competitive. One of the things people don't realize that feeds the LLMs information that reiterates who you are and what it is that you do, that
Yeah.
gets ingested. And so right now, the hottest new thing in the SEO world is AIO, right?
Yes.
It's, how do I get the chatbots to know who we are, what we do, what problems we solve? And that, often the content team is just sitting there thinking, like, I can't think of anything else to talk about or where to post that content, in particular syndicating it out to new places. And when you do this partner marketing, often, it'll be on their blog and a different version will be on your blog, right? Because you each took a different piece of the video, or you each had a different abstract of a conversation. And that stuff's really great. It may take 6 months, 9 months, or a year to show up in a chat GPT or a Claude or a Gemini, but it's a byproduct of that. So there's a win-win in many ways.
No, I love that. And we're also starting to think a lot about, what does SEO mean in a Gen AI landscape, right? And I do not have an answer for that yet, but it's something that's going to be really important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the 10 blue links are going away anytime soon, because I think people do different queries in different ways. And of course, Perplexity is a little bit of a mashup between blue links and a chatbot, right? So it's clear that while it seems like a chatbot is a winner take all, where you ask one question and there you go, you get one answer. I think, people are starting to prompt engineer, asking for lists, top
Yeah.
this, et cetera. And then it still feels much more SERP-like, but it comes from a different algorithm. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that evolves
Oh,
over the next year.
that sounds
Well,
so good.
thanks so much for joining me. Any final comments, or it seems like you're about to have another comment?
No, I think it's not an area of marketing I'm very well versed in, so I'm going to need to pick your brain on it.
Absolutely, happy to do so. Uh, well, thanks, Caitlin, for joining me and sharing, your marketing journey for yourselves and for the Simbe product, but also sharing the best practices that you think other folks should be implementing.
Thank you so much for having me and for this platform. It's been great to listen to over the last couple of years.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.